Hello there, welcome back, and if this is your first time here, welcome. If you've been following the channel for some time now, you will have noticed that I've only made videos about World of Warcraft so far, but there is another MMO that I spend a lot of time in too, and that is Final Fantasy XIV. My Final Fantasy XIV journey began in late 2017, which was the year that Stormblood was released, their second expansion. I had tried my hand at several other MMOs before 14, with the likes of World of Warcraft of course, Lineage 2, Wildstar, Guild Wars, and my beloved Ragnarok Online, just to name a few. I'd always been massively interested in the Final Fantasy franchise since playing Final Fantasy XIV as a kid, but as far as MMOs went, I never felt myself swaying from WoW for too long before finding myself back in Azeroth. WoW was always my number one game. Seeing the WoW exodus as players flocked to Final Fantasy XIV as an alternative due to how poor Shadowlands was, or the lawsuit, or whatever it might have been at the time, was really compelling to me, as I would watch players go through the same motions that I did, from understanding and learning the MSQ to seeing how different the game functioned. In this video, I want to talk about 5 things that changed my perspective of World of Warcraft from playing an extensive amount of Final Fantasy XIV. This is all subjective and experience based of course, and whether you find yourself agreeing or disagreeing, I hope you will enjoy. The most obvious one is patience, and if you've played Final Fantasy XIV, I'm sure you expected to see this. Final Fantasy XIV is not a fast-paced game, certainly not early doors anyway. It's a lot of running around, a lot of back and forth with questing, and is jam-packed with dialogue and cutscenes, providing you're not a dirty cutscene skipper. This can get very jarring for players who've played a lot of World of Warcraft, as they're used to being thrown in the deep end in regards to fighting mobs and pressing their buttons quicker. 14 is much more of a slow burner in that respect. Even if you choose to skip the cutscenes, you're going to be doing that a lot because it's a story-driven experience, and the majority of the game's features are gated behind the mandatory main scenario quests, also known as the MSQ. The GCD is the most noticeable thing initially, I think. At least that was the case for me, and until you get your own GCDs to weave in, it does come across very slow, especially when compared to World of Warcraft's combat. I convinced a few of my friends who play WoW to give Final Fantasy XIV a try, and their first complaint was the combat was just too slow. I reassured them that it does improve as time goes on, but the road is long, and the GCD is just the tip of the iceberg in Eorzea. I mentioned cutscenes and dialogue, so let's dive into that, as it's something we don't see in WoW very much at all. There are of course cutscenes in WoW, but they're much more fleeting. When doing content for the first time in 14, a cutscene will play when entering a dungeon or a raid. When zoning in, party members will have to wait inside a barrier for players to view said cutscene before commencing. A second cutscene will play before the dungeon's final boss begins, and experienced players can set up an auto-skip for these cutscenes in the settings, so they tend to run ahead. It's still standard etiquette to wait until all players have viewed the cutscene before beginning the fight. On the flip side with World of Warcraft, you would zone into a dungeon and away you go. There aren't any cutscenes or reasons to wait around unless a player goes AFK, and even then that sometimes isn't enough for a group to stop. Perhaps a better example is looking for raid, also known as LFR or the Raid Finder. LFR is a way for casual players to experience a more watered down version of the raid, but still allowing them to have a battle and story experience. They would fight the bosses, see the cutscenes, and obtain some loot. LFR wasn't a solo experience though, and essentially was no holds barred. People wanted to get in and get out. Some would even AFK. You wouldn't be given time to look around or appreciate the zone and the atmosphere. You may not even get a ready check for the boss depending on the group. LFR just felt like a means to an end and a way for people to obtain some easy loot for minimal effort. Blizzard understood this was a problem in both dungeon and raid settings, and have implemented both follower dungeons in Dragonflight, allowing players to play at their own pace with AI, and are addressing raids in the War Within, and providing a story mode which can be played solo, or up to 5 players, which is a really great idea, and I feel with this installment, they could just go ahead and remove LFR now, as I don't think it will serve much purpose going forward, and having 4 raid difficulties is just unnecessary. Another crucial example of patience is with new players. Final Fantasy has a mentor system which is dedicated to veteran players who can offer their time and experience to help guide new adventurers. You can identify a mentor if they have the crown icon next to their character name. Mentors can invite new adventurers to a channel called the Novice Network, which is a dedicated space to help newcomers. New players are often handled with great care in Final Fantasy, and players love to help out, whether that's completing content or giving people advice and directions. I don't think Final Fantasy is an easy game to learn at all, and it can be very confusing and cumbersome to navigate if you're playing it without any guidance. You may not know this, but World of Warcraft actually has a mentor system too. A guide system was introduced in Shadowlands where players could go to their faction embassy and enlist as a guide. There were specific criteria that would need to be met to become a guide, and you would then be invited to Newcomer Chat, a separate chat that appears anywhere in the world where guides and new players can interact. New players in WoW will now automatically have access to this chat and are identified by having a Murloc icon, with guides having a green flag next to their name. I suppose I wonder if anybody's actually had success with this or participates in it, because it still seems like quite an underground feature, but hopefully it's helping some players out there. As somebody who got really involved in this corner of content within Final Fantasy XIV, there is the Hunt. There are mobs within the game known as S ranks, and they serve as rare mobs which can be spawned by players after completing various tasks. Doing the correct actions is not a guarantee of a spawn, as there is an element of RNG. S ranks are intended to be group content for players who have finished the expansion. Once the rank has been spawned, it's considered polite to wait several minutes, allowing groups to form before engaging. There are dedicated Discord servers and websites to help track these mobs. This doesn't always go to plan though, as there are some players who are just notorious for pulling early. If a mob has been pulled early, players will sometimes attempt to reset it to allow players who are late or are still travelling over from different servers to get there in time and make a tag. Using the comparison of S ranks in Final Fantasy XIV in WoW with something like rare mobs just doesn't quite work the same way. I'm sure maybe on some servers or in very populated zones, some players may put a shout out in the general chat that a rare mob is up, but most players are using add-ons such as Rare Scanner that will prompt them when a mob is up, and at that point, it's always been first come first served in my experience. Waiting in World of Warcraft isn't really a thing, and likely wouldn't be unless the system to force it was built into the game, like the zoning barrier I mentioned in Dungeons with 14 a bit earlier, which honestly may have been there to protect different loading times, especially in the PlayStation 3 era. All of these things I've referenced with 14 are examples of patience, and I would describe them as unwritten rules, but not gospel. There's an overwhelming boom of positivity and etiquette within the community of Final Fantasy, but that doesn't mean it always works. Not everybody will wait for new players to finish watching their dungeon cutscenes, and will pull S ranks whenever they feel like it, despite players still not at the location. Especially with hunts, it's a sure way to build some infamy, but people, albeit very few, still do it. Sometimes players either don't see that somebody's watching a cutscene, or choose to ignore it and pull the boss anyway. Neither game is perfect in this sense, and can never be. But from learning more about 14 and the community, really did shine a light on the way I viewed WoW in the past, and made me think about how situations could have gone a bit differently if I acted differently towards people. I think it's important that we try and be patient, especially with new players, because we were new ones too. I started World of Warcraft when I was about 14 years old, and as I grew with the game and learned to understand it better, it began to feel more like a job, and I acknowledge that was my fault. It was different with something like vanilla and even TBC. I was so inexperienced and didn't know much about endgame or optimization. I would take my time, I'd explore, I would do stupid stuff like glitching under Stormwind. I even roleplayed a little. I didn't have a care in the world, and honestly, I miss that. What is that line the Pandarans say?
Slow down.
That's the one. There have been so many discussions about how World of Warcraft is just too fast. Whether that's blasting the content, or how fast you can beat a dungeon, or just how fast the content is releasing these days. I feel that sometimes people forget to just enjoy themselves and appreciate the game for what it is, because they're constantly chasing goals or wanting to get things done as quickly as they can. And just to be clear, there's nothing wrong with chasing goals, we all do it, but I do think it has made some players quite jaded and resentful in recent times. I think it's very easy to lose sight of what a video game has to offer and what it's supposed to be, which is fun. It's important to take some time to breathe. We play video games for fun, and they shouldn't feel like jobs or fill us with a sense of dread. If these feelings are happening, then something's obviously wrong, and it's important to evaluate how you're spending your time. If something is making you miserable, take a break. Do something else. There are plenty of other great games out there. WoW is obviously so different to Final Fantasy XIV in regards to the way you progress through the game. You probably remember the days before Chromie time, when you would go into Outland at 58, and then Northrend, Cataclysm and so on. You'd work your way up bit by bit. I low-key miss this method of leveling. It used to feel like a mini world tour, but as I've mentioned in a few other of my videos, it was never a narrative experience, it was messy. With Final Fantasy XIV, you will start in A Realm Reborn and progress through everything, to the latest expansion which is Dawntrail. It's a giant commitment. Even if you do choose to skip every cutscene possible, it's still going to take a long time. When I decided to do the MSQ from start to finish, I think it took me around 160 hours or so. Bear in mind, I knew where everything was and where I was going. 14 epitomises how it's about the journey, not the destination. And this is where WoW and 14 have different objectives. 14 never wants players to rush, and I feel that WoW is designed to get you to the endgame as quickly as possible, and this mainly comes down to the preservation of the game. The slogan for The War Within is "Get back in the fight." They want you in there ASAP. Dawntrail came out early July, and there's nothing about getting in there immediately. I know I'm being a bit silly and hyperbolic with the slogan, but you get what I'm saying. There has always been a focus on endgame with WoW because it's new and shiny, and they're obviously excited to see what players think. I get it. The slogan is obviously pandering to players of the past too, trying to hopefully rekindle their love for the game, as opposed to bringing new players in, but I digress. With 14, there'll be some people who spend well over a year doing the MSQ, maybe longer, because they're taking it all in, or maybe they've got distracted and are doing other fun things along the way, which we'll talk about in another topic. I just find it fascinating how the games are so similar, but also so different. In my opinion, players should treat Final Fantasy XIV like a single-player game, for the most part. Sure, players exist in the world, and you're going to have interactions with players along the way, whether that's in cities or dungeons and the like, but you're locked into this MSQ until you finish. So in that sense, I think it should be treated as a story game because that's what it is. I think players who have played an extensive amount of WoW will find this hard to grasp because the MSQ can restrict a lot of things, and WoW is such an open and accessible game. I think the MSQ can build resentment, especially if players are used to just zipping around Azeroth and getting things done as quickly as they can. The best advice I can offer is to just take it slow and enjoy the ride. I feel that Jesse Cox said it best when talking about Final Fantasy XIV. He called it an RPG MMO, and I think that's the perfect way to describe it. An RPG first, and then MMO second. I want to touch on The War Within's early access release, and how this can be an example of players rushing to the end, and this is something I've been guilty of in past expansions too. I really love the lore of Warcraft, and I've been paying attention to it since Warcraft 3, but when it came to the MMO, I had the mindset of just wanting to get through things as quickly as I could, because only the end game was important to me, and this is just such a bad method of playing the game. I still paid attention to the story, but I would be putting in really long hours to ensure I made it to the end game as quickly as I could. It's not a healthy way to consume a game, and you're probably cheating yourself out of content and potentially fun things along the way. I saw a great video from Preach in regards to his stance on The War Within, and how he encouraged players to give it a chance and pay attention to the story. He would continue to say that this is much more of a story-driven experience and where the bulk of the work is, and that makes a lot of sense. We knew this was going to be a 3-part saga, and WoW's gameplay has always been its biggest draw and has arguably the best combat in any MMO, and the gameplay honestly didn't need to change in my opinion, so it makes sense the big changes are narratively. Whilst Dragonflight was successful, it's definitely divisive, but one thing most players would probably agree with is that the gameplay was great. Something I do wonder is, would Mike be preaching this message if he never played Final Fantasy XIV's MSQ? Maybe. Either way, this is a great thing, and this is another example of how playing 14, or maybe other games generally, can change our point of view. I wish everybody could give the story a chance, but for many reasons, it's just not likely, and if players aren't interested, I don't think they should be forced. There are probably tons and tons of people who never paid attention to the story, and it's just not realistic for them to start now. They get their kicks out of raiding, Mythic Plus, PvP, and they're happy. Just to be clear, I don't begrudge anybody for buying the early access, and World of Warcraft is one of the biggest FOMO games out there, so I totally get it. There shouldn't be a fear of falling behind or wanting to rush to the end though, and honestly, the season hadn't even started, so it made no sense to me. I saw a tweet from Pyromancer expressing his thoughts about the expansion after the first day, and I found it very refreshing to see the way he was playing and treating the game. I think he's a good example of playing at your own pace, and I think that's the best way to embrace the game, but I understand it's not everybody's cup of tea. Players complain all the time about there being a lack of discovery or exploration, and the game just doesn't feel the way it used to, but honestly that just comes down to mindset and the way players choose to play the game now. It would be disingenuous to say you can't explore in WoW the way you used to. The world is bigger than ever. If you feel that you can't explore in WoW or you don't get that feeling, then ask yourself, what do you actually do in the game? Because if it's monotonous gameplay like Mythic Plus or raiding, then you have your answer. If you want to explore, then get out there and do it. I think it's more that players just got so familiar with the game, and they aren't captivated like they used to be. Think about seeing Hellfire Peninsula for the first time and looking into that alien sky. We hadn't seen anything like that at the time, and it was incredible. You could say the same about Hallowfall and The War Within. The game hasn't changed at all in that respect. This is a player problem, not a game problem. The Willsoul Saga is going to change World of Warcraft forever. I think that much is clear. I don't want to say The War Within is copying Final Fantasy, and even if it is, so what? I've said before, this is Blizzard at their absolute best. What they used to do was steal ideas from other people and make them better. This is how World of Warcraft became the titan that it is today. I don't think it will ever be like Final Fantasy in terms of cutscene or dialogue, and I honestly don't think it ever should be. I don't think that would be good for WoW. So many players cutscene skip and are just so uninterested in the story. Similarly to Preach, would I have liked this prior to getting into Final Fantasy? Absolutely, I think so. But following the story of 14 made me appreciate everything. And I do mean everything. Going into houses and seeing what's inside, what NPCs would say to one another, and I think this is reflected in WoW so much now when you see the stay a while and listen moments. It's a really great touch. When all is said and done though, there is no right or wrong way of playing these games. I can only say how I play them, what makes them fun for me, and how my mindset has changed. I think most players will always choose whatever gets the job done the fastest, regardless of whether it's fun or not. Either way, I would never tell anybody that they should play the game a certain way. It's your time, your monthly subscription, do what makes you happy. If you're having fun, the game is serving its purpose. Whilst World of Warcraft has changed a lot over the years, I think most players would say they miss the community the most. It was the heartbeat of the game for the longest time. I used to play on Shattered Hand EU and I knew all the guilds. Order of the Hammer, Everlasted, Skull Squadron, Team Hannibal, Mithrid. It felt great recognising people in Ironforge, Shattrath and Dalaran back in the day. Knowing what guilds they were a part of and bumping into them whilst doing things in the open world. You see their gear and know what feats they had accomplished. I can remember being in awe the first time I saw a rogue in full Bloodfang. This was such a magical part of World of Warcraft that sadly lost its way with the likes of sharding, layering and cross-realm. And I suppose transmog too if the noticing gear thing is important to you. I still think transmog is one of the best implementations they've ever done. Anyway, I think the loneliness set in for me, and I'm sure many others, during Warlords of Draenor, as I spent the majority of my time sat around the Fortress of Solitude, which was the garrison. Something I miss with World of Warcraft is logging in just to hang out with my friends. Our experiences may differ here, as I don't have any friends who play retail WoW these days, so whilst I understand this of course still exists for a lot of people, that avenue isn't open to me anymore. I have moved over to Argent Dawn in the hope of making new friends when I do decide to get stuck back into WoW again. Everybody that I know that still plays WoW is just playing Classic now. The most Dragonflight I played was in Season 1, but without any friends to play it with, I didn't see much of a reason to keep going. Community and friendship is everything to me, and I truly believe you can make anything fun with the right people. But an MMO needs to be about people, and when it stopped being about people, I stopped having as much fun. And when you're playing as a solo player, you realise just how empty the game truly is. Nobody cares about having a conversation or getting to know anybody. People just want to get stuff done. In the sense of community, you're just an NPC to everybody else. You're a means to an end. Cross-realm sharding and layering is a double-edged sword, and whilst I understand it offers accessibility, and it was really needed to help servers that were dying out, it was something that changed WoW irrevocably. Similarly to how cross-faction play is a thing now, it's great for the game, it's great for accessibility, but it feels that it's taken away what made WoW so special and unique. Community in WoW, at least in my experiences since BFA, it just feels like a revolving door now, especially as far as guilds and raiding are concerned. You've got people coming in, people going out. Nobody seems interested in forming attachments or bonds or getting to know people anymore. Maybe I just got unlucky with some guilds I was in. I can only really speak from experience rather than attempting to generalise. It felt like we were working towards a common goal, which was clearing mythic bosses, but when that was over, that was it. It just felt purely business. Nobody wanted to hang out or do other things. Most of the people that I'm still friends with who I met in WoW are likely from Vanilla to Wrath, and I think this is something that is prevalent in Classic WoW too. Vanilla was so captivating and interesting because it was a whole new world. We were all on the same playing field, and you needed people to get things done. Whether that was elite quests, or dungeons, or raids, or maybe you needed an item crafted from professions. You had to form bonds and make connections. The game forced you to connect with people. As opposed to the modern game feeling like a lobby simulator with Dungeon Finder, Raid Finder and so on. When Classic dropped in 2019, people already had their friendship groups. It was still more of a social experience compared to retail WoW, but you probably didn't need to make friends this time is what I'm trying to say. You likely had everything ready to go and were already thinking about raiding, and that was just another giant reason as to why it could never truly be like vanilla. In Final Fantasy, cities are bustling with people and conversation. It's a very active game and community, and having conversations or even just walking up to players and saying hello is normalised. Whereas if this happened to you in WoW, you're probably thinking, oh god, what does this guy want? It's common courtesy to even say hello and goodbye or thank you in this game after completing a dungeon or a raid. Some players will log in purely to sit in cities all day and talk to new players and their friends. The cities are a social hub and almost act like social media. It shows that games don't have to just be about gear, item level or combat. Players will hang out in housing areas, roleplay, plan events. There's even a nightclub scene. I think one of my favourite community-driven events within Final Fantasy goes back to the content I mentioned a bit earlier with hunts. S ranks and hunt trains. Hunt trains are player-organised events, and a group will scout the location of A ranks, which are mobs that spawn after a period of time. They'll pick a spot for players to gather up and parties will form, and then players will follow coordinates to kill the mobs together, based on which expansion the hunt train is participating in. I love seeing familiar names on hunts, and everybody showcasing all their different mounts. Some of the conversations that happen during hunt trains are very reminiscent of the Barons chat in WoW. If you know, you know. It's a really simple but fun corner of the game to participate in. When it comes to the equivalence of cross-realm layering and sharding, I feel that 14 does it infinitely better. 14 has various servers and data centers as you would expect, EU, NA, JP, etc. There are 8 servers per data center, and the best part is, you can travel and visit them, even other data centers. I play on Odin, which is part of the Light data center, and I have friends who play on Raiden. A few clicks of the aetheryte in the loading screen later, and I'm now on their server and able to do things with them in the open world. Queuing for dungeons, raids, and whatever else is fine to do across any server, and if they're on other data centers, such as Chaos and Shadow in my case, all they have to do is travel over. There are no real penalties for being on another server besides being unable to access your retainers, which is essentially your bank for WoW players who aren't sure. Playing 14 brings back memories of the way WoW used to be for me. I'd recognise people in cities, I see the same people AFK in the same spot. I'd recognise the same guilds and groups of players. It's something that just cannot hit the same in WoW anymore. And whilst this isn't game breaking in any fashion, it just felt like more of a community to me back then. It felt like our server, not the mess it is today. I'm not preaching that Final Fantasy XIV is a perfect game, and with that, I think it's important to talk about what is described within Final Fantasy as toxic positivity. 14 is often described as a safe place, but that's only a half-truth. Some might say it's too safe, because you can't voice your opinion without a mob coming after you. During the WoW Exodus, when players would jump over to give 14 a try, some were met with some pretty poor behaviour from the community at times. I think it starts off great when you come over and show the game some love, especially when you're a big name like Asmongold for example. Tons of big WoW players and streamers were trying the game for the first time. I'll use Asmon and Annie Fuchsia as examples of what can potentially be labelled as toxic positivity before talking about some other issues. Asmongold coming over to the game was a massive deal. A household name, and somebody who is just iconic with WoW. Whether you love him or hate him, he's insanely popular, and he put a lot of eyes on the product. He took to the game really well, absorbed the lore, and was paying attention.
She's so hot.
He took a break from streaming and the game, and never really found his way back. When he did come back to streaming, he was repeatedly badgered by viewers to play the game when he was doing other things, and in turn that made him withdraw from the game even further, which was a real shame. I think a fair assessment with the 14 community is, they're really nice to you, until they aren't. Players love watching new players playing through the MSQ for the first time, because they love to see how people will react to the story. But if you criticise their perfect game, some might come after you. The story isn't for everybody, and Annie Fuchsia eventually stopped streaming the MSQ due to difficulties handling complaints with her reaction to the story, which is frankly absurd. There can be a lot of passive aggressiveness, and some players feel they can't speak up or say how they feel in fear of being dogpiled. It can even be a difficult conversation to encourage players to use certain abilities, or to offer them advice. As the saying goes, you don't pay my sub. I feel it's important to bring up toxic positivity because Final Fantasy XIV isn't this perfect little world that everybody says it is. Is it awesome? Absolutely it is, but it would be wrong to say it's all sunshine and rainbows. You're going to have bad experiences everywhere, and Final Fantasy's no different. In closing, both games have their issues, and the community and social aspect of course still exists in WoW, but playing 14 was a massive reminder of just how vital connections can be to player experiences. I still think World of Warcraft is a great game, and whilst I'm not playing it currently, I still think about it and read about it a lot, but it's become very clear to me that without bonds and friendships, the game just doesn't have any staying power for me anymore. I know that when I get back into WoW, there will be changes I need to make to ensure I have better experiences going forward, because it has been really lonely the last couple of years. I can't be that solo player just collecting anymore. Final Fantasy gave me a tight-knit group of friends, and if I was to play WoW again, I know that I would need that there too. If you wouldn't mind, I'd love for you to write in the comments one of your favourite moments or memories with a video game. It doesn't even have to be an MMO if you like, but I'm curious as to what people would say because I think these memories often stem so far back in the past. Some people might say beating the Lich King for the first time, or maybe your first Deadmines run. Some might even say pulling out the Master Sword in Ocarina of Time. Nobody really talks about things that happened yesterday, or a few weeks ago. An MMO offers so many different avenues of enjoyment and there is just so much to do. I asked the question in another video of mine, which you can click here somewhere on the screen if you're interested. What is fun to you? Fun is obviously subjective, but what are the things that you enjoy doing, and why do you do them? Some players might say there isn't enough to do in World of Warcraft, but I disagree with this. There is so much to do in World of Warcraft, but the question is, what is the draw? What motivates you and drives you to complete your task? For the vast majority, I would say it's power and gear. People love their character being stronger and they love doing more damage, and for some players that's the only goal. I'm a big time collector, so if I see something I want, whether it's a pet, a mount, or a title, I'm going to work for it, and I don't really mind what the challenge is. If I consider it worth my time and I want something badly enough, I'm going to do it. Like the Mage Tower in Legion, for example. How many of you struggled to obtain those artifact skins but knew you were going to work your socks off until it was done, and it felt so good to finally achieve that? I know I'm not alone when I say this. Good lord, give us another Mage Tower, Blizzard. My problem with WoW is, as I grew up with it and got older, it became formulaic, predictable, and I knew what would be required and asked of me. I knew the rep grinds I would have to do for the enchants. I knew my best in slot. I knew how to make my character as best as I possibly could for raids and so on. When you have all of this knowledge and you're in the middle of something like BFA, for example, that's tricky. Because now there's no such thing as playing at your own pace anymore like we just talked about, at least not without being punished or falling behind. BFA was all gas and no brakes, and I want to make something really clear. You didn't have to do it, but of course players would, and I was one of them. Players love to optimise and want their characters to be the strongest they can be. Why wouldn't you want this? It's very satisfying to know your character is full bis and feels complete, but using this example of BFA, it was just impossible to really do the things you felt like doing because there was always a job to be done. There likely wasn't enough hours in the day for you to finish all of your chores and then do the things you were actually interested in. BFA introduced features such as island expeditions and warfronts, but they were very poor and forced you to engage with them by locking power behind it. The same can be said about Torghast in Shadowlands, and if you've seen any of my other videos, you know I've been banging this drum for a long time, but it's true. Blizzard introduced content that so often forced the players to engage with it, which in turn breeds resentment. If players were allowed to seek out island expeditions or warfronts purely for enjoyment and because they wanted to, they would have likely been received a little bit better, rather than the mindset of, oh, I need to do this so I can increase my Heart of Azeroth level, because that's how the majority of players viewed these systems. It was never about the gameplay, it was about power, and for the record, I'm not defending these systems, they were extremely underwhelming, but hopefully you understand where I'm coming from. Players became victims to this style of gameplay, and it hurt the game for a really long time. BFA ranting aside, there are lots of things to do in WoW, but it's not applicable to all players. It would be wrong to say there isn't enough to do in the game though. I think the easiest way to look at it is, there are avenues of the game you enjoy, and there's avenues that you don't. If you enjoy WoW unconditionally, and bask in its entirety, you're going to have tons of things to keep you busy. Heading over to Eorzea with Final Fantasy XIV, there is bags of content, and none of it mandatory outside of the MSQ. For example, you could unlock Blue Mage, which is a job outside of the usual system. There's housing. You can even visit the casino-like Gold Saucer inspired by Final Fantasy VII with its minigames, and the Triple Triad card game from Final Fantasy VIII. Or maybe you want to chill out on your own private little island. There's something for everyone. The game offers so much, and the best part about it all is that it's evergreen. It doesn't just get left behind like some of WoW's systems of the past. The content is preserved, and that's really exciting to me. There are so many things I still haven't tried, but I don't feel rushed into doing them, knowing they're waiting for me whenever I choose to engage with them. I suppose something that is big for me is that I'm still learning things with Final Fantasy XIV despite being a player for several years now. There isn't a PTR and there's no data mining like with WoW, so when something new is out, it's fresh and exciting for everybody, and I really wish Blizzard did this with WoW. I feel if Blizzard actually took the time to play and test the game themselves, they'd have a better understanding of why sometimes the community gets so frustrated with them. I think one of the best things about an MMO is how creative players can be. A big element for some is player-created activities, of which roleplay is the biggest example of. Some players may even feel too afraid to admit they roleplay in WoW, because everybody's first thought immediately jumps to Goldshire. Imagine roleplaying in an RPG game, you nerd. But on a serious note, some players actually do get shamed for this, and I think that's really sad. I think there is such a focus on content and rewards that things like roleplay often get swept under the carpet, and it's easy to forget that it exists, or is a huge reason as to why some players play and love the game. I have a friend who plays World of Warcraft and all he does is roleplay. He hasn't raided in years and years, and the last time he really gave WoW a real shot was in Legion. Now he just logs in every now and again and roleplays with his guild, and that's all WoW needs to be for him, and I think that's really great. Another example will be players holding transmog competitions, which became incredibly popular with Asmongold, but now there are many guilds that host events like this all the time. It's all about having that awareness to know that we can do whatever we want, whenever we want, but we've conformed to these behaviours, and there's also a huge fear of falling behind in terms of power levels. I think a lot of it probably boils down to the company you keep and what goals you have in mind. Similarly to playing at your own pace, I can only echo the same closing statement. There really is no right or wrong way of playing. Fun is the goal and everything is subjective. But I do think it's clear to see that taking breaks or playing other games can change a lot of behaviours, habits and point of view, which is a good and healthy thing. Okay, don't get the wrong idea with this one. I'm not saying that World of Warcraft doesn't have kind players, and I'm certainly not saying that Final Fantasy XIV taught me how to be kind, but playing through the game and having some of the experiences that I did was a firm reminder of just how important these abilities and behaviours are, and how they can make or break a player's experience. I can still remember one of my first experiences when I started in Final Fantasy XIV so clearly. I was AFK in a town called Aleport, and when I got back to my computer, a player was stood next to me and had opened a trade with me. He traded me a minion and 2 million gil just because he saw the sprout icon next to my name and saw that I was a new player. We struck up a conversation about the game and I joined his free company for a number of years. I've met some really amazing people in this game who have not only helped me understand the game better, but even helped me in my personal life. I was lucky enough to go to FanFest last year and meet my friends, as well as some pretty cool people in the community. I was even lucky enough to meet Yoshi P and ask him some questions. We sadly weren't allowed to have pictures taken, but I was so pleased to get his autograph. Players will help newcomers in this game because they want to. It's an exciting thing to watch somebody go on their journey in this game, from seeing what happens in the story to seeing boss mechanics or fight transitions for the first time. It's a really special element of the game, and to quote good old Zidane from Final Fantasy IX, you don't need a reason to help people. Most people who play World of Warcraft probably assume that you have good knowledge and should know everything already because it has such a hard time bringing new players into the game. It's easy to assume players are established. Newcomers are always going to try WoW, but whether they'll stick around or not is a different story. I cover the leveling experience for a new player in another video of mine, which you can check out here if you're interested. A big problem with World of Warcraft is that it is policed extremely poorly by comparison to 14, and doesn't punish bad behaviour as much as it should. I think it's fair to say in WoW you can get away with murder. Being disrespectful in Final Fantasy XIV is a reportable offence and is often taken seriously and enforced on. There is a zone called Mordian Jail, which is an instance disconnected by players. This is where game masters will teleport players for disciplinary or debugging reasons. There's more to it than just being under a watchful lens though. There's less stress in toxicity and people are nicer because they want to be, and those who aren't tend to get weeded out very quickly. I think it can sadly be very easy for some players to depersonalise others and not have much of a regard for another player's feelings. Some may just see characters and pixels on the screen, and your thoughts and feelings never enter the equation. It should be as simple as, treat others how you wish to be treated. There's never an excuse to treat another player like crap, and manners cost nothing. We're all a part of these amazing games and worlds, and we're all able to hang out together, make friends, and slay dragons for shiny loot. And I think that's pretty cool. So I wanted to originally title this video Eyes Open, because I feel like Final Fantasy XIV did so much for me as a player, and even as a person. It really did open my eyes and almost reconfigured my DNA in a way as an MMO player. Again, this isn't me bashing WoW in any way, but I feel that a lot of us WoW players have conformed to certain behaviours and sometimes poor etiquette, and some things are just accepted or normalised in WoW and perhaps they shouldn't be. It feels like we've lost our way a bit. By no means is Final Fantasy XIV a perfect game, but from playing a different MMO, I've become more patient, more nurturing, and more empathetic towards players, and it's helped me now view WoW in a completely different lens. I finally feel free of the rat race with WoW and forcing myself to play it in a treadmill fashion. My mindset has totally shifted, and now I simply do what's appealing to me. I think age might possibly have something to do with it too. I'm 33 and I don't exactly want to hammer the game like I did back in Legion, for example. I'm not that player anymore, and it's difficult to know if I would still be that player if not for playing Final Fantasy XIV. A quote I read when putting this video together was, if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. Most importantly, I want to see both games thrive. We're very lucky to be able to experience both games, and they've touched my life in so many ways. This video is of course my opinion and based on my experiences with both games, so whether you agree or disagree with anything I've mentioned, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one.